Thanks for having me.
Scott, let me start with what was reported by the Financial Times. It says that Iran is preparing to attack Europeans, Bulgaria, and all of these countries, even Cyprus, if some escalations happen. And we had the report that Iran warned the GCC countries that they're witnessing what's going on in the region. If something happens, they're going to attack them. The other report was the aviation. It says the activity around Iran is American airplanes are, they have increased the activities close to the Iranian border. It means that they're trying to do something, and the statement on the part of Iranian somehow shows that they are concerned about the new attack. Maybe the new attack is coming. But when you look at the situation right now, and Donald Trump yesterday and the day before, it's all about the economic pressure on Iranian. He said yesterday there is no talk, no negotiations happening, which was, by the way, confirming what Iranians were talking about, because they said no negotiations are happening. But we know that they're sending messages, even yesterday and today, they're sending messages to Iranians via the Pakistani government. What is your assessment of the situation in Washington and the way that Donald Trump wants to continue, the conflict?
You ask a question that's literally impossible to answer in a manner that reflects, I would say, traditional, analysis derived from classic political science. Because to talk about the mood in Washington, what is Washington? Washington, D.C. is the seat of government. The seat of government, of course, is, the executive branch and the legislative branch. But the seat of government is also the various departments, organizations, administrations, and then the foundation of, the foundational infrastructure that sustains government. We can call it whatever we want, the deep state, but the permanent bureaucracy, supported by academia, supported by various, economic institutions. I mean, we always talk about, the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. That's part of, the seat of government. It's the heartbeat of America. It's where policy is made in America. And there are processes involved in the making of policy. Just to speak about lobbying, the way lobbyists work, to infiltrate ideas into government, into the various deliberative bodies of government, both those established by law and those that aren't. Don't think that, when a bunch of executives get together over lunch to talk about, what, the policy should be about X, Y, and Z, that may not be established by Congress, but that is as much as powerful as any congressional deliberative body, because those people then influence lobbyists who go to Congress and the money that flows and things like this. What I'm trying to say is that's how one normally would evaluate, what's happening. That question, what's happening in Washington, D.C.? To attack that problem, I would take apart Washington, D.C. and then, filter it through the specific policies you're asking about. How is Iran policy made today? Well, it's not made in the traditional manner that Iran policy should be made. For instance, there should be, a directive from the president that's filtered down through the National Security Advisor that's then farmed out to the various, departments or agencies who will then act on that by creating committees, both internal to their agency and committees of an interagency basis that are formed based upon the directive to solve a specific problem. They will then send taskers out. Some of these taskers involve getting economic information. Some involve getting intelligence information, other sources of information. They will inform themselves. They will hold consultations. They bring in people. I've been brought into many deliberative bodies within the interagency process over time to give testimony, to answer questions so that they can can, again, empower themselves with knowledge and information to come up with answers to the problem set directed for them to resolve. And they'll work together and come up with a consensus that'll be fed through the president using, the processes of government. Congress will be informed. There will be consultation between the executive and the legislative to make sure there's a balance, and then policy will be made. And then when policy is made, everybody goes, when the president says, execute X, Y, and Z, everybody goes, they know what it is because they said, we were involved in the making of that policy. So when you say, what's going on in Washington, generally would say, how are people responding to actions that then can be compared to the objectives set by formal policy? What's going on in Washington, D.C.? That's not how it works today, Nima. It works today. The president wakes up and puts out a social media post. That's policy. Staffers no longer attend interagency processes. Staffers wait. They're like a fire brigade waiting for an arsonist to set a fire. And the president is the arsonist. The fire is a social media post. And he'll say something and the people go, well, what do we do? Now they run around and you have people working cross purposes. Is the Treasury Department's sanctioning program coincides with the Department of Defense's, blockade program? Are the two coordinated, or are they just operating independent of one another? Because when the president says, in order to do this, we need certain sanctions to be lifted against Iranians. Has that been filtered down to the Department of War now so that they can allow certain shipping to come through? No, there's just no coordination. They operate totally independent of one another based upon what people think the president wants, based upon social media postings that haven't been sent through a deliberative process. So what's going on in Washington? Total chaos, total anarchy, total confusion. There is no Iran policy. There is no Iran policy because you can't call a day-to-day reactive reality policy. That's just panic. To have a staff member wake up in the morning waiting for a social media post so they can run out and deal with the problem as it emerges is not. What does this president want? I mean, one day we're told we're preparing for a massive strike. The next day we're told that we're lifting sanctions against 3 IRGC people. One day the president's working with Oman to, open up a shipping lane so he can say the Strait of Hormuz is open. The next day he's overreacting to an Omani collaboration with the Iranians about how that would actually be implemented, threatening to bomb Oman. Really? I mean, did you understand what I just said? One day we're going to be working with the Omanis. The next day we're going to be bombing the Omanis. What's happening in Washington, D.C.? Not a frickin' thing. Nothing's happening in Washington, D.C. because it self-negates because of the emotional instability of the madman who currently occupies the White House. That's what's happening in Washington, D.C. Now, let me take a step back because I do believe, even though we have all of this madness, there are certain normative realities that have come into being. If it's just like anything, if you just take a step back and let nature do its thing, nature finds a balance. And I think what we're seeing right now, even though the president is stirring things up, we're finding a policy balance. And again, people can disagree. You may disagree. I don't care. I just say what I think anyways. I think there's a policy balance right now that are based upon certain realities. The reality for the United States is that we cannot. See, whenever people say there's airplanes flying around Iran and we may attack again, with what? With what? Did we magically grow missiles overnight? Did we magically increase the number of long-range strike weapons available to us? No. We know we're down to as close to zero as we can, and we know that there's concern in the Pacific and Europe that we don't have enough weapons to deal. The big question being asked right now in policy circles is, what happens if Russia and China get together and say, screw it, let's do a simultaneous attack? What happens if China says, we're taking Taiwan at the same time the Russians say we're taking the Baltics? Now, I think that's just irresponsible thinking, because neither China nor Russia thinks in those terms. But of course, we tend to mirror image ourselves because we would do that. We would say, now's the time to strike because we're a warmongering bunch of people, Europe and the United States. So we're projecting onto Russia and China our own behaviors. But the problem when answering that question, you have to come up with an answer. And the answer is, if they attack, we got nothing. The realization suddenly that we got nothing. except tactical nuclear weapons. That's why Colby is putting forward new policy that says that we will use tactical nuclear weapons preemptive early on in any conventional conflict, because we don't have anything. So having said that, unless the president's planning on nuking Iran, and I don't believe he is, what are we going to do? We're not going to attack Iran, not in a military significant fashion. And I'll talk about there will be moments where there will be clashes. And I think this is going to be the new permanent reality. But now let's talk about Iran. So we know the United States is not inclined to carry out a massive military attack against Iran because we can't. We can't sustain it. Iran. You hear a lot of talk. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Iran needs economic stability. You know that. I know that. That's their number one priority. Economic stability over the long term requires, of course, certain realities to emerge in the Middle East, one of which is to get rid of the most destabilizing influence in the Middle East, the United States, and then to make it so that what happened in February never happens again. But we know that there's no MOU. It's dead, has been dead, and there will not be an MOU. That just isn't going to happen. So without an MOU, without a ceasefire, without any understanding, what understanding exists? The understanding of nature, the balancing of America can't continue large-scale military operations against Iran. And Iran needs periods of stability to promote economic, activity, which is necessary for sustainment of national viability. And so what you see is that both sides have gravitated towards an understanding that avoids conflict. Now, because there is no formal agreement and because this is sort of nebulous, you'll see them bouncing into each other once in a while. They'll bounce. And when you see that bounce, you suddenly get a moment of conflict. Boom. Bombing this, bombing that, missiles here, missiles there, that self-terminate as they gravitate away from one another, back to the balance. And I think that's the situation we're in right now, where both the United States and Iran acknowledge that there will be no short-term solution. Hell, Iran doesn't even want to talk to Trump for 2 years. All right. So if Iran says that, do you honestly believe that Iran is looking for a 2-year war? No. Iran's looking for 2 years of relative stability to increase their military capabilities. As they said, we're building missiles every day, but also to increase their economic health. They need to rebuild. A lot of stuff was blown up. They need to rebuild it. It's tough to rebuild when you're getting blown up again. And the United States, while we may not be able to defeat Iran, we can blow a lot of things up. We've proven that. I don't think Iran's in the business of getting things blown up anymore. That doesn't mean they'll shy away from a fight, but I don't think Iran's saying, let's have another 2-month sustained bombing campaign where a whole bunch of our infrastructure gets destroyed. They're not looking for that. They're not looking to pick a fight with anybody. They will respond as needed when necessary. But in the meantime, I think we're looking at a period of time up to at least the midterms where you're not going to see a major escalation of violence. You're going to see a maintenance of the status quo, where the United States can proclaim a steel wall that doesn't stop anything. Iran can talk about the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, but it's really not open because it's not open until traffic is flowing through in a normative fashion. And as long as this conflict is there, there won't be normal rates of traffic. That's bad for Iran, by the way. Income generation, Iran